Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we've got another Patreon requested lesson. We're checking out This Is The One by the Stone Roses. It's been a really heavily requested lesson for quite a while now, so I'm happy to say that today we're checking it out. I've got a huge thank you to Sam, Joe, John, Callum and Mason. Thank you so much for being my latest patrons. If you'd like to find out more about it, please click the link below and see what I've got to offer. And with that in mind, let's get on with the lesson. Alright then, let's talk about some important details before we get started. I've got the capo on the 2nd fret for this one. We're going to be in the key of E major, and E now becomes a D shape. And we're also going to use this C shape of an E major as well. But I'll get back to that one in a moment. As you can probably tell, I'm using a chorus effect. I'm using the Boss CE2W. It's the Wazzacraft one. It's really great. I couldn't recommend it enough. I'm also using a low overdrive. I'm using the DoD Looking Glass. It's a great pedal. I have it on my board all the time. Other things then, I'm going to be mixing the main two guitars, so the acoustic and the electric together. Let's start with the introduction. It just sounds like this. So I'm starting with this C shape of an E major. If you've recently watched my Naive lesson, then you probably know this shape quite well, but it's a really great one for this particular riff. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with our ring finger on the 4th of the D, and just to make it easier, I'm going to number the frets 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. We shouldn't need to go any higher than that. So like I said, 4th of the D with our ring finger, 2nd of the G with our index, and then middle finger coming over to the 3rd fret of the B. And we're going to start by playing the 2nd fret of the G, then the 3rd of the B, then back to the 2nd of the G. At this point things are going to get a little bit interesting. We're going to take our index finger off and we're going to play this repeating line. We're going to do the open G, 3rd of the B, then we're going to do 4th of the D, and then 3rd of the B. And we're going to do that twice, so it goes like this. So far we've got this. At this point, we're then going to do a descending run. We're going to do the open G, going to the 4th of the D. And then we're going to bring in the rest of the chord and play that twice. And you've got a couple of options here. I like to bring in my index finger to the 2nd fret of the G. So we've got the basic kind of version of our E. You could also add in the open A if you want. Personally, I prefer to add in the pinky finger to the 5th of the A, so we've got the full E chord. So it's not any particular type of inversion. At this point, the bass is then going to come in and go through the sequence, and then we're going to come back in with the main riff, which goes like this. So once again, we're starting with our C shape of our E, but it's a slightly different sound. This time we've got our open G here, and so the chord now has a slightly suspended quality to it, and you could call that E add 4. We're going to start by playing the lowest note first, so the 5th fret of our A. Then we're going to play the 3rd of our B, open G, and then 4th of our D. And then we're going to repeat those top 3 notes 3 times. we're going to go to play it a fourth time with a slight variation. That time we'll go from the B string over to the open G, then we'll go to the 5th fret of the A. All together we've got this. We're then going to play the 4th of the D by itself, slide it down to the 2nd and then play open. And that'll lead us really nicely into the 2nd chord, which is going to be a B major, and that's going to use an A shape. And we're going to play something like this. So we're going to start off the open A string, then 2nd of the G, 2nd of the D, then open A again. We're then going to bring in our ring finger to the 3rd of our B, play the 2nd of the G, and then 2nd of the D. Then we're going to take that back 1 fret, and then we're going to take our ring finger off of the B entirely and play that twice. So all together for our B chord we get this. From here we're going to move into an A chord, and for us that's going to be a G shape. We're just going to play the lowest note first, which is the 3rd of the E. Then we're going to play the 3rd of the B, going back to the 3rd of the E. We're then going to play the open E, 3rd fret of the B, going back to the 3rd of the E. We're then going to finish the riff off like this. We're going to play the open A string, 3rd fret of the B, 2nd of the G. We'll then jump over to the 2nd of the E, open, 3rd of the B, 2nd, and then play our E. All together we've got this. We're then going to play the really iconic musical stabs. And then nice and simple, we're just going to have our D shape and bring on our pinky finger to the 3rd of the E. We're going to do 3 upstrokes, then take it off and do a downstroke. At this point the lyrics are then going to come in, and John Squire at this point typically only plays the verse riff from the 2nd chord. He comes in on the B chord, but he also plays the lead in, so he'll do something like this. So he's going to do that twice, and then the lyrics will go to this is the one, this is the one. He'll completely drop out, then he'll come back in on the musical stabs, and then play the verse riff again once round, starting from the B. And from here we'll then move into the 2nd part of the song. Check this out. familiar territory here. We're going back to the introduction riff, and there's a few key differences, and in particular, the very beginning part of this is really tricky, and on the record it's actually two different guitars. I've merged it together into one for the purpose of the lesson, but it's a real tricky one. We're going to start with the stabs, so our D shape, which is going to be our E, and we're going to put our pinky finger on the 3rd fret of the E, so the chord now becomes a E sus4. And then we're going to take it off and play it. And almost immediately afterwards go into our introduction riff, so we get this. It's a real tricky one, so I'm going to give you a few options. The first option is to go from our D shape and move over our middle finger to the 3rd fret of the B really quickly. A second option, if you don't like that, is to move from our E sus4 straight into position. So instead of playing a straight E chord, you can substitute that for playing an E5 and just do the open D string, 2nd fret of the G, 3rd of the B, but play the 3rd fret of the B with our middle finger so we're in position. The third option I've got for you is to play the E sus4 and then immediately go into the riff and just skip out the 2nd chord altogether. We're then going to play the riff a 2nd time, just like in the introduction, but instead of going to the E chord at the end of it, we're going to move over to our A chord, which is our G shape. So we get this. We're then going to play a riff at the end of our G chord. And that's going to be 2nd to 4th on the D. Then twice open G. 4th of the D, open G. Then 4th of the D going down to 2nd. And then open. So our G chord goes like this. If you wanted to as well, you could fit in our riff with our index and pinky fingers amongst the chord. Either way, we're going to move into our B chord, which is our A shape, and we can do our little suspended rhythm as well. And then we're going to finish the progression as you might imagine. Again, for this particular section, here's what we've got. We're now going to move into the second verse where the song's really going to pick up some momentum. We've only got one new riff to play here and the strumming is going to be fairly loose. Check this out. So like I was saying, the strumming's fairly loose here. We've got this new riff to play and it leads us into the second verse. It starts at the 4th fret of the D, playing that twice. Open G twice. 4th of the D again twice. And then open D. And that takes us into our first chord, which is our E5. Just using my index at the 2nd of the G, middle finger, 3rd of the B. And we're going to play a really similar riff at the end of this chord. And that's going to be 4th of the D twice, open G twice, 4th of the D again twice, and then open G. And that'll take us really nicely into our second chord, which is going to be our B. And the real trick with this one is to emphasise the 2nd fret of the G as we go into it. Check this out. And from here we can play our little suspended rhythm. Again, being fairly open with the strumming pattern. And then we'll finish the progression as you might imagine. And then we're going to repeat that a second time. Now at this point the song's going to break down, the lyrics will go back to this is the one, and we're going to play the verse riff we did all the way at the start, so we'll be back to this. We'll then do the stabs. And then we'll hold and then come back in, leading into the B chord. And from here we'll be moving into what I'm going to call part number 3, where the song really kicks off. So we've now arrived at the big finale, and this is where the song really kicks off. We're going to start by replacing our musical stabs with a little build up on our E chord, and we can do some palm muting here. And then we're going to go into this sequence which repeats 3 times over. It just sounds like this. So we're starting with our E chord, moving into our B chord, and you can choose to add in our little suspended riff as well, so 3rd fret of the B, on and off. Then we've got our little riff going into our A chord. So we're going to play the lowest note first, 3rd fret of the E, then the rest of the chord, then we're going to play the open A, hammering onto the 2nd fret, and then open D. And that'll take us really nicely into our B chord, and we've got a little riff to play here as well, and that's going to be open D, 2nd fret, pulling that off, 2nd fret of the A, open D, but that open D will be a part of our E chord. So between our A chord, B chord and E chord we get this. And like I said, we're going to repeat that sequence 3 times. From here, we're then going to go into our outro, which is just going to be one progression played twice. It goes like this. So really familiar stuff. We're just starting with our A chord, going to E, to B, and back to E. We're then going to hold on our E and then play the sequence we just played. We're then going to play that through a second time, and there's a little riff which gets played on the A chord. It just goes like this. So as I get to the end of the A, I'm just going to drop my index finger down to the 2nd fret of the D and just bend that down and then open it as we go into the E chord. And I'm using my middle finger to come in and play the 2nd fret of the G for our E5 chord. And that's just so I can do the same riff on the 2nd fret of the A afterwards. Again, it just goes like this. And that's all there is to it. So that was my lesson on This Is The One by the Stone Roses. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to get involved in the channel, please click the link to my Patreon and see what I've got to offer. And with that in mind, I will see you on the next lesson.